Okay. Well, I felt like doing a live tonight. So basically, this is more or less just going to be a live that has to do with all the things that are going on lately, as there is many things going on. Some things, of course, are hype and just utter madness. And I'm just talking casually tonight. So, being casual, I'm going to discuss how I view everything that's been going on lately, insofar as the news stories and everything else. Look, we already know all about China and Russia. I mean, I have basically given everybody the rundown on the numbers, the capabilities, the stats, and I mean everything from their logistical capabilities to the types of weapons they have. I mean, anybody that has gone through my past shorter videos has seen this stuff very well documented. So I'm just basically saying that to say this. Um, Yes, I might go on a diatribe about China and Russia tonight, but also I wanted to show people really quick what I've been working on for everybody. So when I do my next presentation video, you sort of have an idea of all the work that goes into it. Because these maps, these battles, it takes a lot to create these, because these have to do with, setting up the units. This is for the internal conflict. This right here is the battle that happened in Colorado between the Mormon state and the regime forces that were tied down there, basically encircled and under siege between their area of Pueblo and Cheyenne Mountain. Hey, serving Yeshua, King of Kings. Great to see you. And yes, this is the battle that happened there along I-25, that corridor there, just south of Denver, because there's Denver just to the north. This is between the Mormon state and the regime, who had their military and other types of forces in that along that corridor. Now, there's the Battle of Santa Fe in New Mexico between the Mormon state and the La Raza narco state, and you can see there's a lot of guerrilla type fighting in the city, but then outside of the city, there's typical fighting using terrain and other things. So when I do the actual documentary and do the battle maps, I will go into vast detail and explain all the movements and everything. So here we have the battle that occurred in Yakima, which that was a big battle between the regime forces and also against the forces of the Northwest Conservative Army. Then, this is the really big battle that happened between the Mormon state and the National Salvation Revolutionary Front at the very beginning of the war. This is the battle for Cheyenne, and this was essentially over nuclear stockpiles. It was both the Mormon state and the National Salvation Revolutionary Front were trying to acquire WMDs. Like, they both acquired chemical weapons in the hypothetical scenario. The Mormon state got theirs from Deseret in Utah, and they got theirs from Pueblo, Colorado. And then the National Salvation Revolutionary Front here, they acquired theirs in Kentucky at Bluegrass. So then the regime had their chemical weapons stockpiles from Maryland, from Anniston, and also from Fort Detrick. So then, you had this battle over nukes. Here's Warren Air Force Base. Then over here, there was a very large battle in Virginia. It was a three-way battle. It was between the Free American Army forces, the regime trying to block the National Salvation Revolutionary Front forces, and also the Free American Army forces. They were all fighting each other like it was like three-way. And then you had this battle. This was the battle for Gary, Indiana, and Chicago. And of course, the regime has a strong foothold in Chicago, but the radical, secular, humanist, ultranationalist National Salvation Revolutionary Front was battling the regime because their quest in the entire scenario is to rid America of globalism. See, you have a Jolly Roger division right here. This is a whole division of Jolly Roger Death Squad militants. And, you know, then they have their regular militias, of course, and then they have their core forces, which are ex-military or also combat veterans that join them. So it takes a lot to make these maps. See, here's the battle for the Hoover Dam. Now, you have the regime trying to hold on to the dam because they're trying to send power to California because the regime wants to reward their loyalist areas with electricity. Because electricity in the American internal conflict is very, it's very patchy to say the least, the coverage of it. So you have all this conflict going on here. You even have the Brigham Young Brigade that was mentioned in my first video up here. They sent 3 of their battalions from their 8-battalion strong brigade. They sent 3 battalions down to the area. Now, of course, they sent in suicide trucks and vehicles to harass and just, you know, just utterly wipe out as many of the enemies as they could. And they did eventually make it into the city. And they did battle with this Greenpeace woke militia right here because the regime had to use woke militias and foreign volunteers, like all the third world foreigners they've been flying in here, like from like Sudan and Somalia and all those, you know, garbage, you know, third world nations. They have to use their volunteers as manpower along with woke militias. You know, they would really do that too. You know they would. And then you got the Free American Army Forces here. You got the Union of Southwestern Militia Forces in the orange. See, this is a railway. They're trying to hold the railway so they can use it to bring in supplies. The railway runs to Boulder City, and then over here is the actual dam. But the regime is trying to hold the airport at Henderson so they can get supplies flown in because they're basically encircled. And you see there's a lot of fighting going on in the city between 4 different factions. Because even the Mormon state has a battalion that's going in there to do some damage. But, you know, of all these battle maps, you have all these different situations. I still have a lot more to make. I have to make the battle for Fort Hood in Texas. I have to make the battle for Jacksonville in Florida. I got to make the Battle of Macon in Georgia. And I have to make the a few more battles, you guys. I got a lot to do. This isn't easy. This actually takes a lot of you know, creativity and drawing and everything else. I'm not even completely done with these maps. I still have to like color some of the color coding stuff in. But yeah, that's essentially it on that. You know, it's basically similar in some aspects to the map I made for the you know, for the invasion, for the foreign invasions. And speaking of that, because I'm speaking casually, I'm going to get into talking about that in just a minute. But for now, hold on a second. Hold on, let me find it. Okay. I'm looking for this map of Texas because I just wanted to show an example, you know, for an invasion. Of course, it's hiding from me. I just had it. And it'll come up. I'll find it in a bit. Oh no, here it is. I found it. I put it in the middle of my scenario script that I had to write that took me days to write. That 2-hour-long video I did. Yeah, well, I had it hiding in there. This is the Texas invasion map that I made, and you can see all the Chinese and Russian units. You can see the Trojan units are circles where they begin, where they materialize on CCP properties here, and here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and here in Central Texas by Fort Hood, where 3 Corps is. And of course, you know, you have them coming over the border in 4 big prongs. And this was only in the Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma area. So you would have a lot more stuff going on in other areas. I never did the Texas one in my actual documentary series, the 96-hour invasion series. And the reason I didn't do it is because it's too big. It's way too big. You've got like 145,000 reactionary civilians trying to fight back. You got roughly about, 45,000 military, regular military. Then you have like another 5,000 or so National Guard that made it and actually got, to mustering and, getting their equipment and gear. So yeah, that was the Texas invasion scenario map. Now, with all the stuff that's going on with Taiwan and with Russia lately, of course, I'm going to talk about this because, some of it is hype. Some of it's hype, but some of it is a legitimate issue because, as I've told you guys, facts and figures wise, China and Russia have gargantuan forces and equipment between them, especially China. China has more vehicles, period, than anybody, because that includes their storage numbers. While Russia does maintain a fairly big fleet of attack helicopters and also utility helicopters in storage where they're well maintained, and also a bomber fleet that's in storage that's well maintained, and I've gone over the numbers, they have quite a few Tu-22 strategic bombers, as well as the new Tu-16, which is small in number. I think they have about 16 of those and counting. But they have the Tu-16, which is a new supersonic strategic bomber with new avionics, new radars, new targeting acquisition, everything. And, they also have, they're upgraded Tu-22s, and they're also even Tu-16s that they have in storage that are well maintained. They have a huge fleet of strategic bombers. Russia actually does have the biggest strategic bomber fleet in the world. Now, if they were to take out all their storage numbers and everything, and China is actually number 2. Although when you look at Western media sources or other types of sources, because I look at all various types of sources, not just Western sources, but I look at neutral sources, I look at Eastern sources, I look at raw numbers as far as production numbers of each vehicle, what was sold, what was kept, what was put in storage, so on and so forth. Because there's so many conflicting numbers sometimes, you really, really, really have to look at so many different source materials to actually get the correct information by overlaying the information to see what fits and what doesn't. So when you have Russia, who actually really does have the most strategic bombers in the world, that poses a very, very significant threat, especially since they have standoff cruise missile capabilities and everything. Can you imagine about 500 or so of those, maybe even their whole fleet, headed for North America over the North Pole, firing their standoff cruise missiles and then doing carpet munitioning raids? And yeah, it would be an utter disaster. You wouldn't just have that, you would have China's too. Now, China has a new bomber. It's a new stealth bomber. It's called the H-1na. The H-1na actually doesn't look anything like our B-2. Their H-1na, they had a B-2 prototype, but their H-1na is actually a uniquely indigenous design for the Chinese. And they already have 2 stealth fighters. They have the Ch1na, which has been in mass production for a good while, several years, at least 5 years. They've had that in mass production. And then you have the newer J-31, which is their newer stealth fighter, which is like a miniaturized F-22 that was reverse engineered and improved upon. And now you have their H-1na strategic bomber. Now remember, China already has the second biggest strategic bomber fleet on Earth with some 242 strategic bombers and counting, because they're producing their new stealth bombers to go with their older H-6Ks. So they have that. And you also have to understand that just the sheer number, if you combined Russian and Chinese armor, APCs and IFVs, self-propelled guns, towed howitzers, and rocket artillery pieces, along with just their raw numbers of their forces and their air power and their navies, they eclipse us so bad that it's not even funny. It's not even a competition. I mean, you guys, surely you remember when I put out my prediction video. Well, looks like I was right, because it looks like all these things are about to come true, which is why I am actually on a push to put out my documentary as quickly as I can, because I want people to be able to navigate 2 different types of things, an internal conflict and also a foreign invasion. Now, I've already shown you guys everything I could on the foreign invasion and how to navigate that. I made an entire community tab review playlist, which has it's just a treasure trove of information for people. You could literally, learn about logistics, and you can learn about tactics, because you need to understand that because both it'll be used against you, but you also can employ them yourself if you have a small group of people you can train with. So it's a treasure trove for those sorts of things, that type of information about how logistics impact operations on the, militarily speaking, how they impact the foreigners and how they impacted the partisans in the stories and in the map videos for the foreign invasion documentary. So there's a whole logistical part, there's an entire tactical section, and there's also a beginning section that builds up like building blocks, where each video, I start from the very basic necessities and I work my way up. So I highly recommend you go to the community tab story review playlist. Now, you have to understand, I don't have no fancy intro music or dramatic music or any of that garbage. I just lay it all out there because I'm a very simple man. I'm a humble man, and I work with what I have. I have a very primitive cell phone and I have the ability to draw things. So, if you can understand my drawings and you can tolerate them and you can literally, get a grip on them, then that's going to help you a lot, because there's a lot of information in all the drawings that I've done. Because if you understand how different forces operate and you understand how they operate from the squad level all the way up to the army level, because I've written stories that you could read, that you could learn about what they did that worked, what didn't work, and why what they did that worked, and why what they did that didn't work. Because, in such a situation as a foreign invasion, you need to learn how to evacuate. You really shouldn't be in a big city to begin with, but, let's be real. People live where they live. And, even in an internal conflict, evacuation is probably one of the most important things, because you need to get out of the hot zone. You need to get to somewhere that's safe. You need to get to the countryside. And if you go to the countryside, you need to go to a place where you have pre-positioned logistics, because again, logistics are what makes or breaks you. Even at the individual level or the family level, you still need to have a plan for logistics, because without food, without ammunition, without spare parts for your firearms or whatever, without lubricants, without medical supplies, without water, without food that's cached away at other locations, yeah, you're going to be in deep shit. You're going to be up shit's creek without a paddle. Sorry for saying the word shit, but I don't feel like that's a curse word, because it's just a synonym of excrement, essentially. So I use that word, but I try not to drop F-bombs. I do my best with that. So basically, hey, B-Ran. Hey, finally got to see the chat again. How y'all doing? How you doing, B-Ran? How you doing, serving Yeshua, King of Kings? Talk to me. Tell me something. Anybody that has any questions for me in particular, feel free to ask, because this is just a casual stream tonight. I'm not trying to really, go balls to the walls with laying things down. I'm just sort of up late pondering everything and working on my project, because there's a lot to be done. I have to make at least 5 or so more battle maps, and then I have to write a short scenario script so you guys can see how the junta of the Free American Army launched their coup, and how their coup failed, and how they became a faction, and also a little bit more on the National Salvation Revolutionary Front faction, who are the radical, secular, humanist, ultranationalist factions. So I need to do that. I need to do these battles. Yeah, hey JC. Yeah, I'm chatting. I'm just chatting. I'm just seeing who's in here. If anybody wants to talk to me, ask me anything, I'm free. I'm just kind of BSing tonight. Oh, thank you, serving Yeshua, King of Kings. I do appreciate that. You love my research and wait, hold on. No, hold on. Let me see. Oh, wait. No, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. Wait. Hey, I'm sorry, man. I hit the wrong button, serving Yeshua, King of Kings. Oh, man, thank you. I'm so sorry, man. I hit the wrong button. Keep sending me messages. Send me another message. I was trying to read it, and then I hit the wrong button. I didn't mean to delete you, man. I'm sorry for that. Forgive me for that. It was an accident. But yeah, I saw what you said. Yeah, it's going to be a whole lot, man. I mean, the internal conflict and the foreign invasion is going to be a whole lot of. It's going to be a big mess. You're going to have a lot of refugees from different regions because, again, oh wait, how do you think this Kaliningrad thing? I think that a lot of that is just a lot of hype because I think that Russia is just treading as carefully as they can because they're meticulous planners. They're very meticulous. They still have their limited incursion in Ukraine, and I'm sure that they would like to wrap that up. And as they're doing that, I'm sure this is just my personal belief, but I am positively sure that by now Russia has actually mobilized their 2 million man reserves. Maybe not all of them, but at least about 1 million of them, because they're anticipating a war in Europe. And now you have to remember, too, the Chi-Coms have sent cargo plane after cargo plane after cargo plane filled with air defense weapons and also troops and also armor, light armor, like APCs and things, because I'm sure that by now that they've sent at least some kind of infantry force, like a mechanized infantry force with maybe an air defense battalion attached to it or something like that. I don't think it's like a huge force in Europe, but they've sent something at least substantial enough, because you remember, the European armies are not very big. They're not very powerful. They're pretty small. Shadow Mask, you're in Lebanon for 6 weeks. Got back. Well, welcome back. Yeah, Middle East is crazy, man. I've been there too, but I've been to Iraq and Kuwait, and I think we accidentally crossed into Iran a few times. At least that's what our Dagger said. Our Dagger is our GPS system that we had. I think when we were doing border patrols when we first got there to get acclimated to the country, we did a border patrol on the Iran-Iraq border because it was only 12 miles from our FOB. So we did border patrol when we first got there, and we went on some windy mountain roads that sort of like took you in between Iraq and Iran, and I think we crossed into Iran a few times. We had a few showdowns with the border guards too, because they had some concrete pillboxes in the mountains and like in the foothills. You could see it in the Zagros Mountains. We had a few showdowns with them. Like we had our crew serves ready just in case that they wanted to get froggy, but of course nothing ever happened. But who knows? We could have started World War III maybe back then, all those years ago. Somehow we made it to now. It's amazing. It is amazing, really. Hey, Heather, you said, hi, I would love to know your thoughts on Agenda 20. Oh, yeah. Basically, like in all my older lives, Heather, basically I broke it down like this, and I'll break it down just for you since you're here. Okay, China and Russia are a separate set of elites. They are not part of the Western elites or their plans. The Western elites have their plans, but the Eastern elites have their own. China and Russia want to take North America for themselves. Russia wants to become a resource superpower by ruling the Arctic. They want Nunavut, Alaska, Northwest Territories, and Yukon. So when China and Russia invade, they want all the mineral wealth, all the oil and gas wealth, everything that's in the Arctic, they want it. And Alaska used to be theirs anyway. They want it back. They also want northern Canada. China will get the rump state of Canada, all the bottom provinces, and they'll get the lower 48 for their food production, because China needs it for food production. China has always stated, Wei Fang himself, the defense minister who's in charge of the Chi-Com military and paramilitary, he said from his own mouth in his speech to the Politburo that he wants to basically genocide and enslave Americans and colonize it with Chinese. He said he wants to make Chinese into good Americans, and that was like a little joke of his when he was talking about colonizing the United States, which were basically verbatim was what he said. Was he made his little joke about replacing Americans with Chinese and saying that they would be good Americans, but that was like implying genocide or enslavement. And he also talked about how they needed America for its food production capacity and arable land. So yeah, China has their own plans. And they also want the resources of the lower 48 and the rump state of Canada for themselves. Like Russia would get all the Arctic stuff, China would get the lower stuff, they would get all the arable land for food production, and they would get the resources that were down in the lower 48. And Russia and China would both attack the lower 48 at the same time. If you read my stories, what happened was that China and Russia attacked the entire country at the same time, but then after about 6 months, Russia pulled out back to their territory that they wanted for themselves after they were done helping China. So basically, China occupied the lower 48 in my stories after the first 6 months, then the Russians left and they pulled up to back to Alaska and the northern part of Canada on the Arctic Circle, which became a part of Russia. I hope I'm not talking too fast or confusing you, Heather, but I was basically saying that they basically are two different pairs of elites. The bottom line is Russia and China have proven this time and time again because, look, Russia and China don't give a rat's ass about the Western elites or their plans or their ideas. They really can't stand them, and they use them and they let them destroy themselves with their green stuff and everything. Like if you watch my live, it was really good, Heather. It was called "The End of the West, Not the World." I really went into depth explaining all the intricacies of that. How they basically, the Chinese will manipulate the Western leaders into destroying themselves and push them into the green energy, while China doesn't do it. China is like the opposite of us. Like they keep their factories running 24/7 because they're all about meeting the quota there. They have quotas to meet. They have production quotas. They are a communist, secular humanist, despotic police state regime who invented the social credit system. The West wants to copy it, but here's the thing. The West won't be around because China and Russia are going to invade the United States and destroy it. And the Western elites are so stupid, they're so arrogant and so full of hubris that they weakened their own power base when they tore the United States apart, dismantled its food systems, sold off its strategic reserve, the vast quantity, the vast amount of it. When they did all that, they weakened the United States to the point to where we're beyond. See, China could have beaten us no matter what anyway, because we already had this puny woke military that's depleted, that's basically like out of steam. It's out of steam, I mean it's running short on critical weapons and parts and things it needs to run as a military force. And China could have already crushed us a few years back. China's been the world superpower for at least 5 years, the world superpower in real terms, real numbers. And I'm going to go ahead and go over some of that right now, just for you, since you asked, Heather. And, you know, I appreciate you coming, and I'm glad you came. But here's the thing. China has the biggest military on Earth. And, China has their Belt and Road Initiative. To you that just said that about Latin America, China's all over the world. China has subjugated through stealth, through cunning, through economic and financial prowess. They've conquered a lot of the third world through their Belt and Road scheme. And they use that as a way to infiltrate those countries, subvert them, and pick their own political leadership. The Chinese basically have puppet leaders in those countries that they've subverted and taken over through the Belt and Road, and they've done it through stealth. So now they dictate the policies of those countries. While they did their Belt and Road and were being smart and doing smart things and building themselves up, we tore ourselves down. As I told people, the West is an empty shell of what it once was. The West is weak. We're basically a cardboard cutout that could be blown over by a gust of wind. And China's that gust of wind for sure. So now, okay, you think about it. You have China and Russia, who the Western elites, basically Putin is a spy, a KGB agent by nature, okay? And he infiltrated the World Economic Forum to find out what they were up to. But, you know, he's a KGB man. He loves Russia. And he went back and used that against them. So when they did their sanctions on him, they backfired. And Russia's now winning. You know, they're grinding down the Ukrainians in a limited incursion of all things. It's a limited, small incursion. The Russians did not commit that many forces to Ukraine. inside the borders of Ukraine itself, although Russia's military compared to Ukraine's is gigantic compared to Ukraine's, inside of Ukraine itself, Russia only sent in like some 70 battalions. That's like 65,000 so odd troops with their gear and equipment and logistics. So Russia sent in this small force that was outnumbered locally inside Ukraine itself. Now, okay, so within the borders of Ukraine, their whole military and paramilitary forces outnumbered the Russian incursion forces by 10 times. It was about 650,000 Ukrainians against 63 to 65,000 Russians. And those 63 to 65,000 Russians have ground down Ukraine to the nub, to where they're basically no longer combat effective. They're like a light infantry force at this point, with a few scattered artillery pieces and maybe a tank here and there that didn't get hit by cruise missiles or by strategic bombing or by ground attack aircraft or by Russian artillery that they tend to mass together and just shell and rocket entire areas. So basically, Ukraine has been ground down to the nub, and Ukraine was the very best that Europe had to offer as far as a military is concerned, because the Western European militaries are puny, they're tiny. In fact, I have it all wrote down about the 4 biggest NATO European contributors. I have a video about that if you'd like to see it, Heather. It's back a ways. It's about Russia compared to them. Let me find that paper. I wrote it all down. I write everything down. You know, when I do my research and my studies, I write everything down that I can so that I can have it for reference material for when I need it. Let me see if I can find it. I have so much papers, you guys. I have so many papers. Yeah, I have so many papers. I'm sorry about that. It got disconnected. Yeah, I've got a lot of papers. I'm trying to find it here. It's the whole Europeans versus Russia. And basically, if you combine Germany, Great Britain, France, and Italy, which are the 4 biggest NATO European contributors, they basically they have nothing on Russia. They ain't got nothing on Russia. Russia is like 3 times bigger in personnel than the 4 biggest European NATO contributors. Now remember, Ukraine wasn't NATO. Ukraine was a NATO partner, as the lingo went, you know, but still, they were the best that Europe had, essentially. And the Russian small force, their limited incursion small force, their expeditionary force, destroyed the whole Ukrainian army virtually, ground it to the nub. I mean, there's not much left. But anyway, the sanctions backfired and only hurt the West. Russia's had its biggest grain harvest in many years, according to the Russians. The Chinese have hoarded most of the world's food supply, over half of the grain, you know, at least half of the corn, basically half of all the beef, and about 2/3 of all the pork for the year. China has hoarded all that. By May, by the month of May, China has hoarded all that food. I read it all off in my live that I did before this one. That's a good live too, if you really want to. Oh, here it is. China food holdings. Okay, here it is. China has 70% of the world's corn. Yeah, sorry, I had to correct that. 70% of the world's corn, 60% of the world's rice, 50% of the world's wheat. It's 50% of the wheat, I'm sorry. They have 450 million heads of pork, which is 50% of all the world's pork. They have 50,000 egg-laying hens that lay billions of eggs a day. They have 5.6 million metric tons of beef, which is the 4th biggest beef producer on Earth, and they import an additional 800,000 tons. 800,000 tons. So they're already the 4th biggest beef producer, and then they import all that extra beef. What they're hoarding food. They're hoarding food. That is a lot of food to hoard between all those figures I just read. And now, also, between the oil they're now getting from Russia, they've doubled the oil that they get from Russia because it's cheap, and Russia's their primary ally when it comes to resources and military alliance. So they now have an additional 1 million barrels of oil a day, which obviously is going to go to military use. We all know that. So whatever China has already built up in the last 20 years that's inside of the United States on their CCP properties with all their munitions and vehicles and troops that they've brought in over the years, and I told you all how they can do that. I mean, it's not hard. I mean, all they have to do is find independent truckers or that are affiliated with the CCP that can really put the Chinese military vehicles on trucks, and they can drive them to their CCP properties. And over the course of 20 years, can you imagine how many times that they've done things like that and built up entire units on CCP properties, put tanks inside of barns or inside of pole barns or other temporary structures, or put them in underground garages that they may have made or bought out, put them inside of warehouses, everything. Whatever the CCP bought, that's where they stash their units and their materials and supplies. Self-storage places, the homes they own and the apartment blocks they own become barracks. It's all according to the Chinese civil-military fusion policy, which stipulates that anything of a civilian use, be it a technology, be it a property, or be it transportation, anything of a civilian use can be converted to military use. Now, they're a communist regime, so they can do that fairly easily. Even at their ports, they can retool their ports to produce military ships, switching over from civilian ships. They're set up like that. China is set up like that. China has 12,000 shipyards, and they all are capable of producing military ships. Oh, here's some figures about the tank and aircraft production capacities. China, in a year, is capable of producing 750 tanks in a year. That's their capacity. Like, if they used all their capacity, if they were building tanks and they used up all the factory capacity for tank production, in a year they can produce 750 tanks. Russia can produce 250, and basically, the aircraft is 400 for China and 150 for Russia. So it's for Russia, again, they have the capacity to produce 250 tanks a year. China has the capacity to produce 3 times that much, 750 a year. And Russia can produce 150 aircraft in a year, military aircraft, and China 400. That's huge. We can't produce anything near what Russia does, and we damn sure ain't even close to China. I just thought you should know those numbers. I just found those out the other day. Neat, isn't it? Pretty neat. Yeah, basically all the money, yeah, it is money laundering, Heather, yes. So, but I'm not done answering your original question. You gave me a really good topic to discuss because I want you to understand that there are 2 different sets of elites. They're like rival mafia families. Think of it like that. The Colombos and the Genoveses. You got the Genoveses burning down their own businesses while you have the Colombos acquiring new nightclubs and new businesses. And the Colombos are waiting for the Genoveses to really mess up so that they can go in. Because you know how mafia families go to war with each other, but yet they'll also sit down and do business deals with each other. Then they'll stab each other in the back and plot and scheme. That's basically the Eastern and Western elites for you, just on the world stage. It's no different. Now, you have to understand, they've never been a united front, ever. They've never been able to be a united front because there's different reasons for that, because they all have their own agendas. They're all driven by their own greed and their own lust for power. They do not care about each other. Xi Jinping would take a shit on the Western elites if he could, and he will be able to, because once China and Russia destroy the West, all those Western elites that everybody hates, they're going to end up in Chinese gulags. They're going to be meeting the quota. They're going to learn a hard day's work. They're going to learn what it means to meet the quota. They're going to be breaking big rocks into small rocks, or they're going to be sewing tennis shoes. And they're probably going to have to build Xi Jinping a new pagoda, push some boulders up a mountain or something. Yeah, I mean, it's poetic justice for that to happen. But at the same time, that's going to be the fate of a lot of Americans too, regular everyday Americans. But just know that because of China's beliefs and Xi Jinping being their emperor for life, their god, they worship him because he's the head of the almighty state. In China, the state is God because China is a secular humanist nation. Secular humanism means that the state, the regime, is God, in their a little g God. That's what it means. Secular humanism, like in my internal Syrian-style conflict scenario, secular humanism is what the National Salvation Revolutionary Front is. They were originally conservative people, not Republican, conservative, as in like they have conservative beliefs, but then they got really warped and they got radicalized, and then they took it into a weird direction where they wanted to rebuild America off the dead, like they wanted to basically cleanse America of all globalism. Like, you know what globalism is. It's basically what the elites stand for. So they wanted, the National Salvation Revolutionary Front wanted to cleanse America of globalism, wokeism, all of it. They wanted to cleanse it, but they were brutal about it, and they were radical and fanatical. And they ended up fighting the Mormon state, who was equally radical and fanatical, but in a religious bent. Like they had a religious bent to them, and they were theocratic. They wanted to put America under a theocracy in my scenario, in my internal conflict scenario that I'm making right now. I showed you all the maps for earlier, the battle maps. And my first video is up. It's the hypothetical one. That's the first video. So if you all see that, it's the storytelling of the origins of how the internal conflict got started and the factions divvied up. But back to what I was talking about. They're two different factions. They're two different sets of elites. They hate each other. The Chinese and Russians, the East in general, hate the West. They hate the West. And they're going to really crush the West because they're going to roll over the weak European nations of NATO, and they're also going to roll over the United States. China is the world superpower. It is a fact that they produce the most steel in the world. 1 billion with a B, 1 billion tons of steel a year, annually. They have more military factories, major military factory complexes, than anyone on Earth. They have over 500 major military production facilities. And that's huge. That's immense. And they also have dozens of smaller ones that are like cottage industry sized. Like by cottage industry, I mean like smaller, like garage-like factories where they produce like smaller quantities of things. Like we have a lot of cottage industry type of defense plants in the United States. Like we have very few major plants. We have just over a dozen major plants, arms production plants for vehicles and munitions and such. But beyond that, all our stuff is very small. It's like cottage industry sized as far as like armaments production and things like that. China is vast. Like they're humongous. Like their capacity to produce ships, tanks, planes is immense. It's huge. It's huge. As far as like comparing it to Russia, they can produce 3 times the tanks and planes that Russia does, because I already told you what the figures were for that, and that's a fact. They can also produce more ships than anybody. They've already outpaced us to the point to where they have the biggest, most advanced, most modern navy on the high seas. They have the biggest submarine fleet. They have the biggest surface fleet. And it's all very modern, the newest electronic warfare equipment, the newest radars, the newest weapons systems, the newest targeting computers, targeting acquisition systems, the newest everything, communications, all of it. SIGINT, which is signals intelligence, and ELINT, which is the electronic warfare stuff. They have it all. And they've already got 4 aircraft carriers. The 4th one is moored in port waiting for new computer systems to be put into it, installed into it. But it's basically, for all intents and purposes, it's finished. So they basically have got 4 aircraft carriers. They launched their 3rd one already, and it's the biggest one so far. So aircraft carriers are obsolete anyway, and that's because of the types of missiles that exist, both hypersonic and the ship-killing varieties, like not just the ground-based anti-ship missiles, but also you got to understand that the weapon systems like the Chinese DF-21Ds and also the DF-26Bs that go even further, Those can sink aircraft carriers. China between, well, okay, let's look at it. Let's look at the submarine exercise that the French participated in. They had an old nuclear powered sub, not the weapons on board, but it was a nuclear powered attack sub. It just had torpedoes and things like that. They had an old French nuclear powered sub called the Saphir, and it participated in an exercise, and they sank an entire American carrier group in that exercise. Had those been live and not simulated rounds, they would have sunk an entire American carrier group with that sub, with that one sub. So the Chinese have more subs than we have. They have hypersonic weapons. They have at least 3 designs out already. So they also have their ship-killing ballistic missiles, and they have the shore-based anti-ship missiles. China can sink our entire Navy in 2 hours flat. 2 hours flat. The moment we go to war with them, China can sink our entire Navy by themselves or with Russia and their other allies. It really doesn't matter. China's big enough to take over the whole world if they want to. I mean, China, their military and paramilitary is ginormous. It's gargantuan. There's actually no word that describes the size of it accurately. They have, as of 2022, now 5 million reserves, just reserves for their PLA, for their army. They have their PLA is over 2.5 million big. Their whole active duty military is 4 million. That's their Air Force, their Navy, their Army, and their strategic missile forces. That's a 4 million man force. But oftentimes, sources don't talk about paramilitary or reserves, but here's their reserve numbers as of 2022. 5 million reserves. Here's their paramilitary numbers. Their paramilitary has 20 million combat-grade paramilitary forces, and that includes their People's Armed Police, which is a very brutally fanatical CCP regime loyalist force. They're the ones that oppress a lot of the minorities out in Xinjiang and Tibet and other places, Inner Mongolia. They've already gotten a lot of combat experience fighting a low-level counterinsurgency operation against the Hui to the Gurs out there in Xinjiang. So you got the PAP, the People's Armed Police, which is like a brutally efficient paramilitary force. Then you have the National Militia of China, which is like their paramilitary equivalent of what our National Guard is, but it's paramilitary. It's huge. Then you got the Marine Militia, and then you got the National Construction Corps, which is like it's like basically an armed and trained version of what our Army Corps of Engineers is. It's like paramilitary combat engineers. Then you have their PLA Strategic Reserve. All of those that I just mentioned combined forms up a 20 million man paramilitary force. It's huge. And then they have, between their reserves and their regular military, they have another 9 million. So they nearly have 30 million troops. Guess how big Russia is? Russia is 3.5 million. They have 3.2 million active duty and reserve military, and then they got another 300,000. They used to call them the internal troops, but now they started calling them the National Guard. But that 300,000 is paramilitary. So Russia is 3.5 million total forces. That's nowhere near China's size. They're not China big. They're bigger than us, but they're not China big. Nobody is China big. Nobody can come close to China. Nobody can hold a candle to the power of Chinese, their conventional military, their Air Force, their strategic missile forces are the biggest on Earth. That's a fact. If y'all can look that up. You guys can look all this stuff up. It's all facts. The Chinese Air Force, you got to do a lot of research when you look into these things, because you're not always going to find accurate numbers the first time you look. So you got to look at production of numbers of planes. You got to look at what got stored away. You got to look at what not just got stored away, but what also got sold, and what, how many were acquired in a given year. So when you look at these numbers, you have to look at it like that. So when you look at the PLAAF, they're the biggest combat air force in the world. They're not the biggest overall air force, but they're the biggest combat air force. We're only a little bit bigger than the Chinese Air Force because we have a humongous Air Mobility Command. And Air Mobility Command is all our cargo planes and such. We also have a lot of tankers and AWACS and other support planes. But as far as combat aircraft, China dwarfs us. China has 1,000 more combat aircraft than we do. And that combat aircraft means that's combining their strategic bomber fleet with their tactical fighter bomber fleet, which is like a ground attack aircraft class, then with their fighters. They have the most combat planes of anyone. They have 2,692 total combat planes, and I'm including the 300 Nanchang Q5s in that are in storage. So they have a gargantuan air force. Their air force is already huge, but their combat air fleet of their air force is the biggest on Earth. Nobody can take China in the air or on land or in sea. Their Navy is the biggest and most powerful. Their Air Force is the biggest and most powerful. And their strategic missile forces are the biggest and most powerful. Although they only have about 1,000 nukes, and that's because of the material they've had access to, the uranium, the weapons-grade enriched uranium, and the plutonium. They've had about 20 or so odd tons of uranium, and they've had about 2 to 4 tons of plutonium. And that's enough for them to have over 1,000 nukes. But I'm going to go with the high median number of 1,000 because it's the most logical, because when you look at all the new missile silos being dug in Xinjiang and in Inner Mongolia, along with the road mobile, the train mobile, and also the missile silos in Manchuria that they've already had forever, China and how many nukes go in a missile warhead, because they have multiple they have MIRV warheads, multiple independent re-entry vehicles. Sorry, you guys, I have a head injury. Sometimes I slur a little. But yeah, they have those. They have those, and China has multiple warheads that go inside of one missile warhead, basically, like the MIRVs I'm talking about. So China has a lot of conventional ones. They have decoy MIRVs, but they also have the real deal, the real nukes too. And China's 1,000 nukes or so is basically, according to the treaty we have with Russia, we're only allowed to deploy 1,000 something. No, I think it's 2,000, but we have like well under that. We only have like 1,400 nukes deployed, and Russia has a little more deployed. But Russia has an overall bigger stockpile than we do. So basically it's Russia first, us second, but China third. And China has a big enough stockpile. 1,000 nukes is enough to wipe out 2 huge nations. So China is still the world superpower because they still have enough nukes to get the job done if they had to. But nukes are not going to be the primary threat. Yes, they will use some nukes, but that's not going to be the primary issue. China's policy in war has always been a conventional policy in terms of war making. And you even got to see this when the Sino-Russian border conflicts occurred. Did you know that even though that back in the day when the Soviet Union was a superpower, they secretly feared China? They secretly feared the size of the Chinese conventional forces, their neighbor to the south? I mean, that was a very brief period of hostilities, and then Russia and China became all buddy-buddy again, but they had a border conflict over an island in the Ussuri and Amur rivers that are the border of Manchuria and what used to be the Soviet Union, which is now Russia. They had a very brief, undeclared war there, and members of the Soviet Politburo were deathly afraid of an all-out war with China. Even though they had nukes, even though Russia had more mechanized forces, the size of the Chinese armed forces was so huge, so vast, that they were terrified of having an all-out conflict with China because they knew they would just get overwhelmed, you know. And China's always been industrialized anyway, but they're really, in the last 5 years, since the end of the 90s, when China has taken all our trade secrets, they've milked us for everything we've got. They've got our crown jewels of our military technology. They've stolen trade secrets. They've infiltrated corporations, industrial espionage, the whole 9 yards. When China got what they wanted from the West, see, when Nixon shook Mao's hand, or I'm sorry, Ch1na was the leader at the time. When Nixon opened up to China, he was making a deal with the devil, because China has always hated us, and they always planned. See, this goes back to the 2 sets of elites. They've always planned to destroy us and capitalism and the entire system. Even though China is quasi-capitalist, You got to understand that they're still run by communism because their regime is a communist regime. And even the corporations there have to swear loyalty to the CCP and to Xi Jinping. They're actually technically a part of the CCP, de facto members, because you don't get to run a Chinese corporation unless you basically kiss the ring of Xi Jinping, because Xi Jinping is their god, basically, because he rules the almighty state. And China's a secular humanist regime. China could give a rat's ass about Klaus Schwab or that guy that with that weird Israeli sounding name. I can't think of him. It's late at night. And also, all the other scumbags like the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, all of them. He couldn't, Xi Jinping couldn't care less. And Satan, when the 10 kings come, and that they're going to be the 10 victorious kings, and I'm talking about in Revelation, the 10 kings that the Antichrist flatters to get them to give him power, their power, because they have real power, they have real militaries, real economies. When the 10 kings come, basically it goes like this. They defeat the West in World War III, so the Antichrist rises. He saves Israel's bacon from the fire by basically interjecting himself and convincing the 10 kings, flattering them for them to give their power to him, but also on the same token, he's making a covenant with Israel that the 10 kings that he just flattered and got their power won't attack Israel, and then he breaks the covenant halfway through. So that is essentially it. Satan doesn't want pansies and little silver spoon in the ass Western globalist elites co-ruling with his son, the beast. He doesn't want that. Satan wants warlords like Xi Jinping and Putin and Kim Jong-un and all the rest of them. He wants warlords. The 10 kings are going to be Eastern kings. The UN in its current state will not exist. This UN that exists now will be replaced with a different UN. It'll be an Eastern-centric UN, and it'll be run by the likes of China and Russia and the beast, because the beast is going to, basically unify the 10 kings. And that also goes to show you that there was never unity among the elites, because the beast has to unify the elites at the end times. And that even lasts for only a short time, because even the 10 kings begin to bicker and fight amongst themselves, because that becomes clear and evident as you read Revelation, because the thing is, Revelation says they will rule for 1 hour with the beast. And 1 hour in biblical time is just some months. It's not very long. It's just a matter of months in biblical time. Because a day in biblical time is a year. Because Daniel's 70th week was 7 years. So if they rule for 1 hour with the beast, they only rule for maybe 5-6 months, something like that. It's not very long. And then they start to bicker and fight amongst themselves. I'm sure a few of the kings stay loyal to the beast, but the rest of them bicker and fight because greed is and lust for power is what drives the elites of the East and West. But the Western elites are hubristic and stupid and arrogant. They think that they can tear their system down and basically rebuild it in this model of their fourth industrial revolution and Great Reset. But here's the thing. Their dream will never come true because there never will be a Great Reset. The Great Reset is going to be sacrificed so Satan can build his true New World Order, which will be an Eastern New World Order with the 10 kings after World War III. You have to understand, something horrific has to happen for there to be a one-world government, a one-world regime. You have to have a lot of people dying, something horrific. What would be more horrific than a series of wars and World War III? And I'm talking about all of it. It could be regional conflicts. It could be our civil war that we have, when we have our Syrian-style internal conflict. And all of those regional conflicts and our internal conflict leads to the Third World War, where the West just gets wiped out because the West cannot stand up to the might of China and also their allies, because Russia is the second most powerful after China. And Russia could wipe Europe off the map alone, by themselves, even without China. They can take Europe by themselves, but China can take over the world by themselves. They're big enough. I just told you how big their forces are. I mean, my God, they have so many vehicles. in my tank video, I literally read all the tank stats. I don't have them right in front of me right now, but I think that the Chinese tanks, their main battle tanks was something, their total number was something like 19,100, and then their full number, because they also have their, no, I'm sorry, it was 19,300 main battle tanks, if I remember correctly, and then they have their 3,800 light tanks. And that's all the stuff in storage and that's active. And all the storage numbers go with paramilitary units or reserve units. So all their older upgraded stuff goes to their paramilitary and some to the reserves. But the reserves are also getting a lot of the newer hand-me-downs too. The regular Chinese military of 4 million is like their cream of the crop forces that have like the best stuff, the best training, the best ability to deploy, you know, the most readiness status. Like they have a high readiness status, so they're ready for missions to tackle. We're ready for war. You know, the reserves, when they get mobilized, then they're ready. And then of course you have your military, which most of them are like home defense forces anyway. But even their paramilitary could take over a country, because you had the Marine militia threatening the Philippines. And you remember that back in 2020, 2019, 2020, the Marine militia, they started to swarm around Philippine islands, and Philippines felt really threatened because they don't have a modern, up-to-date military. Philippines is a third world nation. They'd get their asses kicked by even like the third-rate Chinese units of like the Marine militia. The Marine militia is like China's answer, paramilitary answer to like our Marine Corps Reserve mixed together with like our Coast Guard. Like that's essentially in a nutshell what the Marine militia is. I mean, they're big enough that they evidently had the Philippines feeling threatened, and that's a fact. So you can go back in time and read up on that. That's annotated. So you had that going on. So if you know their third-rate paramilitary, which is like their home defense type forces, they have category A, B, and C forces. A forces are their cream of the crop, most high-tech, most advanced, ready to deploy, high readiness status, high alert status. They're best equipment, best men, everything. That is their category A forces, like their 4 million man paramilitary, or no, I'm sorry, 4 million man regular active military. Then you have like a category B, which would be like their reserves, and the People Armed Police, which is like a paramilitary unit of like some 3 million out of the 20 million. Those would be like category B. They're ready to deploy. They're pretty well armed. They're pretty well trained. They have experience. Like the People Armed Police has a lot of counterinsurgency training with what they've had to do in Xinjiang, because there's we to the Gers that try to fight back, and the People's Armed Police has had to crush uprisings there. So, you know, it happens. But then you have the category C forces, which would be like your national militia, which is like their home defense force, like their National Guard, but paramilitary. It's a parallel military force from their regular military. So it's a different command structure. Then you have their Marine militia, which is like their Coast Guard home defense for their islands and their coast. Then you have the National Construction Corps, which is like their paramilitary combat engineers, because they're armed and militarily trained, but they're paramilitary. So then you got the PLA Strategic Reserve, which is also a home defense force of the PLA. So they're mobilized as like a last-ditch force. If something were to happen to Chinese territory, they would be sent. But yeah, that's the Chinese forces in a nutshell, and they have vastly more vehicles and equipment than anybody else. I mean, even just like the tank numbers I read you, that's gargantuan. By comparison, we only have right now 6,330 active tanks and 400 in storage from the Marine Corps. So by comparison, that's what we have compared to China's overall 23,100, and that's main battle tank and light tank numbers together. So, yeah, overall, that's huge. That they outnumber us by like 4 times in tanks, light and main battle tanks. So, yeah, they're ginormous. Heather, what are you saying here? Let me see. Yeah, there will be one currency, but it won't be a Western thing. The West is going to be conquered and occupied. So just forget about the Western elites. They're going to be taken and humiliated, maybe probably done away with, if you know what I mean. the leaders, everybody's going to get captured by Chi-Com and Russian troops. All the little hidey holes they made, like underground in their little domes, their deep underground bases, the Chinese and Russians are going to go down there after them. They absolutely are. They're going to pull them out like how we pulled Saddam Hussein out. They're going to pull out those people, those elites, like how we pulled out Saddam Hussein. I mean, really, does China really give a rat's ass about them and what they have? No, because China will just take what they have. Whatever wealth, excuse me, whatever wealth that they've all accumulated, and I'm talking about these uber rich, these globalist elites, whatever wealth that they have, China, after they crush the West and Russia, damn it. Shit, hold on. Okay, I'm back. I'm so sorry about that, everybody. I'm very sorry. I didn't realize that my phone battery was so low and it kicked me off, so yeah, I'm back. Anyway, what I was saying is they're going to pull these elites out of their little hidey holes. The Chinese and Russians will. They're going to humiliate them. They're going to take everything that they've ever had. So, yeah, they're basically going to be dealt with, and you know what I mean by that. But anyway, what I was saying, what I was really getting at with all of that is that, you know, the West will be finished when the AC comes to power. He will arise after Babylon, USA, has been destroyed, defeated, colonized, and occupied by China and Russia. But again, that'll happen after the brutal internal conflict. So, you know, like, that's why I'm making these scenarios, because I want you all to be able to navigate this. I want you to all be able to survive this. You know, when you look at the maps, and you see how the units move, and you see how the conflict goes, and you see all the actions, and I read you the scenario script, and I talk about these factions and what they're all about and the atrocities they commit, it's not to scare people. It's to get people to understand the harsh realities of war. You know, war isn't nothing nice. It ain't nothing nice. I need people to be able to understand what's coming, not out of fear, but to get people to be able to navigate it. I want people to navigate it. I want more effective, better people. That's all I want. You know, and I teach this stuff as if it's like a college course, you know, because I want people educated on what they need to do to survive, like to go out there and stockpile caches, because you cannot operate without a logistical system in place. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I see people coming in and out. It's hard to tell. Say something. Oh, yeah, okay. Hey, Heather. Yeah, he will reap what he sows, Heather. Absolutely. All of them will. Because, for one thing, God's not going to stand for all the evil they've done. Not in this life or in the next. And also, Satan eats his own. Satan just cannot resist. He eats his own. And that means that he's going to sacrifice his little puppets, his Western puppets, so that the Eastern puppets, who are more radical, more brutal, worse than the Western elites, they're going to come in and they're going to establish their system. It'll be a Chinese and Russian, Sino-Russian world after the West is defeated and occupied by them. So they're going to acquire the West with all its resources. They're going to be the main power players in the world. Of course, China is the world superpower, uncontested. But Russia will be a close second. So, you know, in terms of their ability to harness resources and occupy resource-rich lands, Russia will be a close second. Yeah, I'm very sorry for the interruption with the phone dying. I'm glad to see people who are still in here. You know, that shows me who the true blue people are. I appreciate you all. You guys are great. You know, and yeah, hey, Daryl. Hey, I see you there. But yeah, basically, you know, all my true blue people are here. But yeah, basically, that's the thing, is that when the West is destroyed and occupied, it'll be a Sino-Russian world. There will be a new UN, not the UN that is as it exists now, which is a Chinese subverted UN. China has subverted the entire UN to use it as a weapon against the West. That's the thing about China, too, that you guys need to understand. China has infiltrated and subverted not just our country by putting Trojan shock armies inside our country on CCP properties, but they've also infiltrated all our corporate boards. They weaponized Western institutions against us, even the UN. which the UN is largely a Western organization. I mean, let's face it, who gets all the voting rights there? Well, China has subverted it to their whims. Tedros is a Chinese puppet, a shill, and his job is basically to use this whole treaty and everything else against us in whatever ways he can. His mission as a Chinese puppet, a shill, is to do China's bidding and to help to weaken the West even further. And remember what I said about the propaganda, about Smith-Mundt being gone and not reinstated, so they could propagandize the American people. So all this propaganda is agitation propaganda. So yeah, Snowden probably gave them some pointers on how the NSA operates and everything. Yeah, I mean, they have spies. They have a lot of spies for Russia and China. China and Russia both have quite an intelligence apparatus. China has their MSS, which is the Ministry for State Security, which is like a combination of like the FBI and the CIA kind of like rolled together. They're like the secret police in China, but they're also like foreign spies and agents and saboteurs. They cultivate proxy groups and everything, like sleepers. Then you have the Russian FSB, very, very similar to the Chinese MSS, doing very similar things. There's still Russian stay-behinds inside this country, and the stay-behinds were here from the Soviet Union that started families and everything. Like, their whole family is basically built around doing Russia's bidding, whatever sort of odd jobs Russia has, or when the day comes for war, they're going to be the ones that carry out sabotage operations to help the Trojan shock armies of Russia that are already in the country. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm seeing people leaving. I'm like wondering what's going on there. Can everybody hear me? Somebody say something. Anybody? Can anybody hear me? I hope y'all can hear me. Heather, are you still there? Say something. You can hear me? Okay. All right. Well then, okay, good. Thank you, Grace. But yeah, basically that China subverted everything. They and Russia have subverted this entire nation. Thank you, Marjorie. I appreciate y'all. Yeah, this is hard to do when this drains phone battery like crazy, and then when I come back, I'm always worried about audio being well enough. But yeah, they've basically subverted us to the point to where, they've gotten all our industrial secrets, they've gotten all our military secrets, they've infiltrated and weaponized our institutions against us, including corporations. I mean, they're setting us up for an epic fail. Now, all of that is part of fourth generation warfare, which is hybrid warfare. And that includes the military part of hybrid warfare, not just the setup. The setup is the infiltration and subversion and all that stuff. But the actual conflict part of hybrid warfare is when the Chinese and Russians come out of CCP regime properties and start to capture cities and hold important areas and infrastructure after they capture it in a rapid fashion. Because you have to understand, they start out very close to their objectives, and their logistical chains are very short for that reason. So because their CCP regime properties have all their logistics. And they also go and set up along major invasion routes. They'll set up key logistical points where all the external columns and the external component are the forces coming in from Mexico and Canada and beach landing and so on and so forth. Well, they'll be able to roll in and fuel up and arm up and get more ammo for their vehicles at these CCP regime supply and logistical points that are set up by some of the supply units, some of the support units that are Trojan horse shock army units. So what it is the Trojans do a lot of the heavy lifting, but then you have the externals coming in as sort of like a heavy-handed reinforcements to lock everything down even further. And they fan out across the country to aid the Trojans that are already inside, already capturing cities and capturing key parts of cities and whole areas and everything. They have primary, secondary, and tertiary objectives, like I've shown on my maps. When you look at my maps, you could see that they go for like a lot of the highways, the key infrastructure, like the power plants and the cities, and they start capturing key parts of cities first, and then they start cordoning and searching, which is when they cordon off entire neighborhoods and sweep through them, and they clear them out. So that'll be what they do, like as they start to occupy after they conquer like an area, they start to cordon and search things. So that's basically like how I wrote it in the stories. If you read all my stories in the community tab, now you have to read them from the bottom up. Like you have to read each part. Each part is a whole post. Now if you want to read the 4 of them, I've got one called Realistic Preparedness, which is my longest story and has to do with a tertiary area, which is out in the countryside. It's the rural town of Broken Bow, Oklahoma. Then my second story takes place in an urban area, which is yeah, you're right, Grace. They do own a lot of stuff in Australia, too. That's all for their hybrid warfare doctrine. They have military units there. Now, the thing about Australia is Australia has a very puny military. Like, I mean, very, like, it's like extremely small. It's only like some 58,000 big. That's all their branches of the Australian Defence Forces. It's not a big military at all. And then the Australian people are largely unarmed and untrained. And Australia is a very small country in terms of population. It's huge in landmass, but it's got a small population. China would have no time at all. Like, I mean, China would have no problem at all, and it would take them no time at all to basically overrun Australia and New Zealand because they're both very small countries in terms of population, their military. I mean, China would like totally swamp everybody. China's going to basically conquer every single English-speaking nation on Earth because the English-speaking nations are virtually all their enemies, except for Canada, which sold out to China and decided to become an autonomous region of China, like a Chinese puppet state, so that they could base all their external units there to overrun the United States coming from the north and from the south in Mexico. And also they're going to beach land from the Bahamas and, you know, other beach landing forces coming from the coasts of Canada and Mexico to land on California and Washington, Oregon, all those places, up and down the coasts. And they're going to have paradropping and just everything. So the PLA is a huge force. And that's just their regular army. And their air force is the biggest air force. Their army and paramilitary are the biggest, and their navy's the biggest. And they're all very highly advanced units. And of course, their strategic missile forces are another branch they're the biggest in the world. They have the most strategic missiles in the world, and ballistic and cruise missiles. Sorry, stuttering a little. No, but China's just immensely big. Nobody can take China. Nobody. Yeah, Heather, what the Chinese do when they invade, if you watch my scenarios, the same pattern presents itself in every single video. What happens first is the Chi-Coms get their muster signal. They go and muster on their CCP regime properties, and and the Russians and all their allies too on their CCP properties, because China lets the Russians and their other allies use their CCP properties that they bought here to station their troops for muster and assembly and logistical points, like combat outpost type places. Well, basically what happens is they get their muster signal, they go and muster and form up and get their vehicles ready, they do their pre-maintenance services and checks, and they arm up their crew serves or whatever primary weapons they have. They load up on shells and bullets, everything. And then what happens is the Chinese cyber attack and their FK-2000s, which are their anti-satellite weapons, they shoot down all our satellites, so they blind us, so there goes our eyes. And they take out our ears, too, which is the internet, telecom, and all forms of communication. They take down the net and telecom and the grid, all at the same time with cyber. Now, you see, the stupid thing about the West is that Western nations have hooked everything up to the internet. Power plants, just key infrastructure everywhere is hooked up to the internet. So anything that we have, the Chinese can get into and shut down. And China's their cyber warfare capabilities are next to none. Like, they have like the most advanced cyber warfare too, and that's also part of a key role in their hybrid war doctrines. So what they're going to do is they're going to blind us and make us deaf by taking out our eyes and ears. Oh yeah, Marjorie, I was going to talk about that. I think that might be some hype, because there's oftentimes sub-hunting planes that fly around in the oceans. It just depends on how many there are and how long that they've been up. I mean, because they've been doing that for a long time now. You can literally go back and look at stories of that happening over and over and over. I think that they're just doing it as a show of force more than anything. I don't think that they, because what the Russians did do is their subs are very quiet, their newest subs. They are able to get right up to our coastline, but we've also been flying sub-hunting planes for a very long time, just flying them as a show of force. And even still, we can't detect their subs. Like the Russian sub, how it got right up to the coast and it showed itself and then it turned away in international waters. Well, it's just a show of force. They're just doing it to just, try to look like we're able to do something. But, we got the woke military. The woke military. It's a purged military. It's less and less professional. It's more and more of a politicized force. They're more of like social justice warriors than actual military warriors. Because, when I was in the Army and I was in 3rd ACR, that was my unit. I was part of 2-3 Howitzer Battery in 3rd ACR. Now, when I was in 3rd ACR, which is the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, we were a very professional, very gung-ho force. Even if we were depleted, if our army was depleted from fighting, by the time I got out, it was 10 years of a counterinsurgency in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Even though we were sort of depleted after 10 years of fighting and we started to lose really good people or have people wounded and, some of our really good professionals, I got hurt too, and then I got, medically retired for life because I got injured. I got blown up 2 different times in an MRAP. So, but I'm thankful I'm still alive because I almost got killed. First time almost killed me because I was knocked unconscious. Our MRAP lit on fire. And this was during a battle, mind you. I just used my crew serve weapon, my M249, my SAW. I was a SAW gunner, the M249. It was a 5.56 machine gun. I had just sprayed where I suspected enemy positions to be at, and also I even shot at the road just in case there were more anti-tank mines because we had already lost 3 of our vehicles. So we had 3 vehicles hit by mines. So 3 vehicles out of 4 were already out of commission. We were going into a town to do a raid. It was called Smith-Mundt, and the town, on their way there, we lost 3 vehicles. Mine was the 4th, and mine was the 4th and last one to get blown up, but mine was the biggest explosion. I just shot up the town and a shit shack that was ahead on the road that was sort of like off from the town, like off by itself, because I had 2 bullets zing by my head. They were taking pot shots at us or something. So it was a battle. I mean, it was like a skirmish. So I returned fire, and then we rolled the vehicle back, I think no more than 8 feet, and boom, it was like an instant flash. Everything just flashed and went black. And then when I came to, I thought I was dead. I started to feel my body to see if I was, didn't lose any limbs or anything like that. It was fucking, sorry, I didn't mean to curse. My mind is going back to that moment. It was intense. I got thrown around inside of that vehicle like I weighed nothing. I smacked my back, neck, and head into every piece of metal inside of that MRAP. So now I have brain damage for the rest of my life. And it mostly affects some of my motor skills slightly. It also gives me seizures. I've had seizures for the last, however many years since I've been out. I got out 2012. So I've had seizures for like the last, 12 years because I got hurt in 08. So that was the first time I had seizures. But yeah, God did protect me, Heather, yes. But I got injured in that little battle, that little skirmish at Smith-Mundt. That was during our big operation, Operation Saber Tempest, where we were doing village hopping. We started the operation for 3 months of camping out in the desert in circled vehicles. Our howitzers, which are our cannon artillery, our howitzers and our field artillery supply vehicles were like circle in the wagons, out in the middle of the freaking desert. And we did fire missions. We fired HE rounds, which are high explosive shells. We fired illumination rounds. And I think there was one other type of round we fired. I think it was like a mine round that delivered like anti-personnel mines, something like that. We did a bunch of fire missions. It was a lot. And that was work. That was work. Being out there in 125-degree heat where the surface temperature is like 140 on the ground. I mean, yeah, we camped out like that. So, yeah, basically, my brain damage doesn't affect my intellectual abilities. It just affects some of my motor skills and things like that. I'm thankful that I still have the ability to use my cognition pretty well. But Yeah, I mean, I am legally brain damaged though. I mean, I have all the effects. It's mild brain damage, but it's brain damage, seizures and motor skills, and sometimes, I don't walk completely in a straight line. I sort of like veer toward a wall or toward another person when I'm walking. It happens. But yeah, I basically, when that happened to me, I was they let me go to the medical place on our fob. We had a clinic. They let me go to the clinic, and then I would go to the clinic every so often where they would check on me. My back was really like it was horrible. My neck really hurt. I had pinched nerves in my back and neck, and my brain's damaged, and I had seizures start soon after I got back from the war. Well, they let me stay. I had the chance to go home after the second time because I got blown up right on my first time being out after 3 weeks on the fob to recover. They let me go back out on missions. I got blown up again. They offered to send me home, and I'm like, no, I just want to finish the tour because I was young and stupid and greedy and wanted adventure, and because I was making good money there. It was really good money back then. So I was making good money over there, and the stock market crashed during '08, and I set up a TD Ameritrade account that summer in '08. And I made some good money off of AIG. I'll just put it that way. So, yeah, but then, so that was also making good money with my deployment money, and that was good money. So, it was a good experience as far as like seeing ancient history and having a good time with my friends when we got back from missions. We acted like it was the last day on Earth because you never knew when you were going to get killed. We lost 2 people and we had a lot injured, because we had a lot of people get blown up, and then we lost 2 people that died. One got. Well, I'm not going to talk about it. It's horrible. Yeah, but anyway, enough about that. Enough about it. I don't want to talk about it. Let's talk about something else. But let's talk about what's going on with the stuff happening here. I want you all to be able to navigate what's coming here, because you will find yourself in situations where you're going to have to make a choice, where you're either going to have to become a refugee, or you're going to have to learn how to defend yourself, or you're going to have to learn to cache away supplies, because you cannot operate without logistics. Everything hinges on logistics. That is a dire thing that people don't think about, and they need to. If you keep all your supplies in one central location, what happens when that central location gets hit by an artillery shell or an artillery rocket or an anti-tank missile or a mortar or lit up by a bunch of machine gun fire, burned down by a flamethrower? What happens with when a ground attack plane strafes it or drops a few free fall munitions? I mean, you lose everything. Everything's gone. Or if the town gets overrun or your area gets overrun by a hostile force, that's the same thing, same ending. You lose all your stuff. That's why you need to have decentralized logistics. You need to have caches out in nature where you can stockpile things. That is one of the main things I tried to press when I made my community tab story review playlist. I tried to press the issue of having supply caches out in nature. I tried to show you the types of tactics that enemies will use against you, but also that you can learn how to implement if you have enough people. I showed you everything in that, and I highlighted all the important parts of the stories that showed some of these things so that you could see them in actual, how they play out with actual diagrams and things like that, so that you have an understanding of it, like a firm grip. It's a lot of material. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot of material to take in, but who else is out there teaching you how to survive this stuff? Who is really out there teaching you how to survive this stuff? Who is telling you about the importance of logistics and how it impacts military operations and how different tactics work and what works, what doesn't, and why, and all of the dynamics of everything? Who is out there telling everybody this stuff? I just don't see it. I don't see anybody. I see people reading news stories, but anybody can get up there and read a news story. Who's actually doing research and reading and compiling information and finding the correct information by sorting and sifting through all of it to find things that match? Because that's how you find accurate information. You do real research, and real research involves multiple sources. A lot of people don't have the patience to actually sit down and look at about like 20 different sources on one particular thing. And that goes, I do this all day, every day. I'm retired. I have time to. But, I try to make it easy for other people, which is why I do this. So I'm trying to get people to understand how important all this is. This is live or die stuff. This is life. This is serious. This is live or die stuff, because these things are going to come. There is going to be an internal conflict. It's going to be like Syria. You're going to have all kinds of maniacs clicking up into different factions together, and you're going to have, a desperate, rogue globalist regime that's trying to hold on to power like Bashar al-Assad did in Syria. And then you're going to have all these factions not just butchering each other, but butchering the regime. And then you're going to have a desperate regime trying to do things like maybe indiscriminately use chemical weapons. But then you're going to have madmen get a hold of chemical weapons and maybe some nukes. Like how I show you in the documentary I'm making, how like the National Salvation Revolutionary Front, the brutal, fanatical, secular humanist ultranationalists, they get a hold of chemical weapons and some nukes. And even the Mormon state, they have 2 chemical weapons depots in their territory that they acquire VX nerve agents and sarin nerve agents. Let me tell you how dangerous that stuff is. VX is what Saddam Hussein used on the Kurds and on the Iranians. Did you know Saddam Hussein in one day killed 1/5 of the entire Iranian military in one day with VX? Yeah. At the Battle of the Al-Faw Peninsula, the Iranians took the Al-Faw Peninsula, which is Iraq's only sea, adjacent to the sea type of territory. It's a peninsula. Then Qasr is their big port city there. So when the Iranians captured the Al-Faw Peninsula, which is Iraq's only coastline and Iraq's only way to export their oil, which made them have to pay tariffs to go through Kuwait to export it, they had to capture it again. They had to take it back from the Iranians. Well, guess what they did? They used their elite Republican Guard units, elite by their standards, and they cut off the land route out of the Al-Faw Peninsula, and then they used artillery and airdropped VX nerve agent, VX free fall munitions, and also VX shells. And in one day, they killed 200,000 Iranians with VX. In one day. That's what brought Khomeini to the negotiating table, to the peace table. Even Khomeini said, because Saddam Hussein was a radical secular humanist. His Ba'ath Party was like secular humanist to the max. It totally shit on humanity. It tortured all the Iraqi people. Look at how oppressed the Shia were and the Kurds, and even the Sunnis got, they were so scared to say anything about the regime that they just, they all like pretended like everything was all hunky-dory, even if they didn't like it. They were so horrified of Saddam. He was willing to gas his own people, like the Kurds. He killed 200,000 Iranians in one day at the Al-Faw battle with chemical nerve agents. And he took their helmets and those cross sabers in Baghdad that their forces used to march under, the parade field in Baghdad, where they have the crossed scimitar sabers with the arms. Well, the dead Iranian soldiers' helmets were taken, and they used them to cascade out of each side of the arms. What an ugly thing to do. It's like glorifying their death, Saddam was a brutal maniac, but the Iranians were equally maniacal back then because Khomeini was a religious kook. He sent a lot of young Iranians to their death as like human wave attacks, and and then so the regular Iranian military could come up behind them and fight. It was almost like World War I in a way, the tactics they used. They regressed from like mobile warfare, like of the Blitzkrieg type. They regressed back to second generation warfare, which was trench warfare. First generation warfare is walking across the field with muskets and shooting at each other, or walking across the field with bows and arrows and swordsmen. Second gen is trench warfare. Third gen is Blitzkrieg, and fourth generation is combining the Trojan horse concept with Blitzkrieg, with high technology and cyber and anti-satellite weapons and hypersonics and everything you've got, all the newest tech. So that is different war doctrines from oldest to newest. But the Iraqis regressed, and they went back to old-style World War I warfare. But that was really ugly, what they did with VX. Now, you have to understand, in the United States, There's 4 big depots with VX nerve agent. Say that there is a radical Mormon faction that comes up, and they do take control of the Mormon church, which is actually plausible if you think about it. There's so many radical sects of Mormonism that if they somehow co-opted mainstream Mormonism and subverted them and got them to believe what they believed, and that it was like the end-time prophecies of Joseph Smith coming true, and then they got a hold of the chemical weapons at the Deseret Depot in Utah, or they got a hold of the chemical weapons in Pueblo, Colorado. Do you understand what they could do with those? I mean, and that's just one radical faction. Now you had like the National Salvation Revolutionary Front, the brutal secular humanist ultranationalist faction. They got their chemical weapons from the Bluegrass, Kentucky depot. And then the regime still had chemical weapons because they had their stockpiles in Anniston, Maryland, and Dietrich. So, yeah, that was quite a scenario script I wrote out. If you all went and actually listened to that, it was a pretty well thought out, pretty well written thing. Now that is a Syrian style conflict where you have factions. Oh yeah. They're they're gonna use all kinds of people, like the mentally ill and the like there's people out there that think they're Vikings or whatever, or there's people that think they're aliens, or there's all these woke people that don't even know what you know what I'm saying. They don't even know what bathroom to use. Like, you think about it. The regime is going to be so short and desperate on manpower because they have quite a bit of the military overseas, like I explained in the other live. They're going to need all the manpower they can get just to try to hold off against the different factions. Because, look, when you have discipline breaking down in your military because you have a woke, puny, pathetic military and they start to break off and join other factions or create their own, the regime is left with very little forces. So they're going to need all the manpower they can get. This is a vast nation. Well, like I said in my last live stream, do you understand what it took to occupy Iraq and Afghanistan at the same time, which is equal to Texas and California? It took basically almost half of our military to occupy both simultaneously. And we had to do troop rotations, which meant that you had to rotate fresh troops in as the tours of other units ended. So as one unit's tour ended and they had to go home, to recuperate, you would have a fresh unit come in, rotated in. So if you're rotating your whole military between a landmass and population size that equals roughly Texas and California, because Afghanistan is Texas-sized in landmass with a California-sized population, and then Iraq's the opposite. It's California-sized with a Texas population. So all in all, when you combine them both, it's equal to like Texas and California. We needed a lot of help. We needed tons of help to do that. We needed Iraqi puppet regime forces and Afghani puppet regime forces, which was their national police forces and their military, which each one had about a size of 1 million when you combine their military and police, their national police. So it was like roughly split along these lines. It was roughly like 300,000 army, 200,000 national police in each country. Then you had the American military, ours, which was like in both countries, we had close to about 400,000 in each, I would assume, during the surge, when we had the surge. I'm sure y'all remember that. I was part of the surge forces when I got deployed. Well, I went during the surge. So, we had quite a lot of forces there, and we had to keep rotating them because you can't leave units in one place forever. You got to rotate them out, when you have people that get killed or injured too. So you got to like bring in fresh people. All of that stuff figures in to how military operations run as well, besides just the logistics, which is the biggest part, because you cannot have a military operation without logistics. And when we sold off a lot of our emergency fuel stocks, the strategic reserve, we ain't got nothing left. I mean, our military has no way to do anything. They can't fight a war. They can't even hold down this country. They're not big enough. They don't have the resources, so they're not going to disarm anybody. So that's hype. All this gun grabbing stuff is hype. It's a result of the Smith-Mundt Act being gone. It's agitation propaganda, pure agitation propaganda. Don't let it get to you. Don't let it get under your skin. I know it does. It has a tendency to do that, but that's what it's there for. It's there to agitate. It's there to inflame. Don't let it do that. Hi, Daryl from Bloomington, Indiana. Yeah, Well, don't let that stuff bother you because the regime is not powerful enough to occupy this whole land. They can't, they just don't have the numbers. They don't have the logistics because they've sold off almost the entire strategic reserve. We don't even produce nearly as much oil as we do because they shut down all the major pipelines and oil producing areas. I mean, look, we're really up shit's creek with a paddle, and it's not because of the regime. It's not because of the globalists. It's because of all the maniacs that are going to come out when the economy collapses. It's because of all the factions that are going to rise up. I am calling it like I see it. There will be an internal Syrian-style civil conflict with factions. That's what that means. It means there's going to be different factions, and they're all going to be competing over limited resources. They're even going to be competing over who can get a hold of WMDs, which is insane. Like I was just talking about with the VX and everything. Yeah, they're going to be competing over all that stuff. They're going to be competing over territory and what limited resources remain. They're going to be trying to push ideologies that they believe in, and it's going to be a madhouse. This place is going to be a madhouse. And nobody, like how Assad and Syria could not hold Syria together, this regime here is a punk, woke regime that cannot hold America together if it falls apart. Let's just face it. Let's face reality. They don't have the power to do anything because they don't have the logistics. They don't have anything. Yes, you're right, Daryl. They're not even going to be able to draft nobody. It's a joke. That's why, like, when there's an internal conflict, they're going to have woke militias and foreign volunteer militias that are people from like Somalia or Sudan, whatever type of third world people they flew in here, because they did, or Latin American people. They're going to like try to get them to fight for them, but they're going to be so untrained and undisciplined by that point. They're all just going to either like desert or retreat or run away. I featured some of that in my battle maps. I featured like a BLM unit that ran off because it got a little too hot and heavy for them. And then, another one with a, Greenpeace, like a Greenpeace militia. I'm sorry, y'all. It's too funny. They have to use woke militias. It's like the mentally ill. And like the swing both ways people and everything else. They have to use them to fight because they don't have enough manpower. They're like the most undisciplined, like poorly equipped, just garbage forces you can imagine. Just get their asses kicked on the battlefield, all around the battlefield. Yeah, it's a joke. Yeah, they're a joke, man. But yeah, they have to use all that. Then you have like all these kooky, religious, cultish, like Mormon state people that are like, they're doing this stuff that like the ISIS does in Syria, or like the Taliban does in Afghanistan. Like you got people like that right here in America. They're called the Mormon state. They're like the religious kooks that do all the same type of shit. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? Oh, yeah, people like that, Heather. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, all these mentally ill and woke people, they're going to, the regime, the globalist regime is going to have to try to use them to fill their manpower pool because they don't have enough people. I mean, like, really? Like, this nation has 4 million miles of roads. 4 million miles of roads. They tried to beta test checkpoints, and they only were able to do a few. And nobody even noticed. Nobody even noticed. I barely noticed. Every time, I almost forget to mention that. I try to mention that every time so that people remember that they did try it. There's 4 million miles of roads. They couldn't do it everywhere. They did that back in 2020. They did it on the state line between Montana and Idaho, and they did it also on the New Mexico-Arizona state line. Nobody even remembers it, really. I mean, I barely remember it, but I try to make it a point to mention it because that puts everything into perspective, that they're not big enough. That's why I mention it, because they're not big enough. There's too many roads. This nation's too vast. This is the 4th biggest nation in land size on Earth. Between America and China, it's roughly neck and neck, but China's a tad bit bigger. But like, America is so vast that, like, a 2.2 million man force trying to occupy America with no fuel, not enough food, not enough parts for their vehicles. It's a joke. It's a joke. I mean, really, how would they do it? How would they do it? It's impossible. It's impossible. I mentioned all that in my impromptu live stream I did with the Russian MiG-41 as the new MiG-41 as the thumbnail. That's a good one to listen to if you want to learn about why logistics affect things the way they do and how it's impossible for the regime to disarm this nation. There's more weapons than people in this nation, and people, only the wokesters are going to give up their firearms, like the really stupid indoctrinated people. Everybody else is going to say F you and keep their firearms and not allow them to be taken, if you know what I mean. They're gonna then factions are gonna arise amid the turmoil and the rioting, and factions are gonna come out of the woodwork. People that you didn't even know were there. Can you imagine like a million types of like Kaczynskis come out of the woodwork and start like making certain types of things occur, like Monograph calls it, blue eye operations. One eye blew that way, one blew the other way. I mean, can you imagine that? Can you imagine all the psychopaths in this country coming out and joining different factions and doing diabolical, dastardly deeds? Can you imagine that? This nation will rip itself apart. And the regime will be like Assad's regime in Syria. It won't be able to occupy much of anything. It'll start losing ground really fast. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to inflame and agitate so that they can rip the old system down to build their great reset. But it's going to fail because they didn't anticipate all the free radicals and wild cards and everything else. They're deathly afraid of that, as they should be, because they don't even know what's out there. I'm talking about the elites. They don't know how it's going to happen. I bet a lot of them are probably going to get swept up in it, and they're going to wish that they never tried to do their stupid Great Reset. It's all going to backfire. And then when the Chinese and Russians come in, they're just going to crush them. The Chinese and Russians are going to take this whole place over, and they're just going to obliterate them. They're going to smash them. They're going to pull them out of their hidey holes like Saddam Hussein, and they're going to put them in Chinese concentration camps where they're going to work for the rest of their short, miserable lives. Or if they're lucky, they might get the honor of being Xi Jinping's personal footstool. Where everywhere Xi Jinping goes, he gets to use their back for a footrest. Can you imagine that? That picture of Xi Jinping sitting on that all-red throne in his all-red suit. He's the Red Dragon. I call him the Red Dragon. But I think he's a principality for sure because he rules the most powerful nation on earth right now. I mean, I can imagine him using like one of those, like using like a Rockefeller or one of them as like a footstool. You know, he would do that just to humiliate them. Yeah, make them crawl around like a dog, just utterly humiliate them. While all the rest of the Western elites and former leaders are working in the camps, sewing Nikes and, you know, cracking up boulders, making bricks and building pagodas or whatever they're going to have them doing, you know. I mean, they're going to be meeting the quota every day, or they don't get their bowl of rice and they get put in a stress position. Because that's how the Chinese like to torture people, put them in stress positions. So yeah, they got a fun life ahead of them. That's if they make it through all the stuff that's coming. So while they're in their little hidey holes. Oh, this show's just a casual show, Daryl. I'm just yapping. I'm just talking. I just feel like talking about all these different things. I just have a lot on my mind. I wanted to show people at the beginning what I was doing with my project, and I showed some of the battle maps I got done. I got a lot more to do, though. This is a very in-depth project. I want you to understand. Yeah, Monograph is great. He's funny. Yeah, I like watching Monograph. But, yeah, this is a very, very in-depth project I'm working on about this internal conflict. But, yeah, I've been yapping on a little while. Does anybody have any questions for me before I go? Because I'll answer questions. I'll answer any questions anybody has. That's basically what I did this for. I wanted to interact with the audience, but there's not a lot of people because it's late. Anybody have anything to say? Oh, you think Biden's... Yeah, of course. Of course he is. Of course he is. He's a puppet. They're all puppets. Oh, no, you're good, Daryl. You're good. I can take jokes. I'm just chilling, man. I'm just chilling. This ain't no formal event. This ain't my Friday show, and it's not my Technical Tuesday, and it's not my documentary. I'm just here to talk. I'm just here to be a regular person with everybody else. I'm not trying to do nothing fancy tonight. Yeah, Trump. Yeah, they're all puppets. The whole left-right paradigm is made up. It's all a joke. The left-right paradigm's fake. The left-right paradigm being the whole Democrat-Republican thing. When you see in my scenario, when I use the word conservative, you got to understand in my scenario of my internal conflict, anytime I use the word conservative, I mean like old school family values and old school moral values and ethics. That's what I mean by conservative. I'm not meaning Republican. There's going to come a point where people realize that the whole system has failed them because the whole system is the machination of these crazy Western elites that used it as a way to enslave people into thinking that they had some sort of power over something when they had none because their leaders were picked for them. Politics is nothing but WWF wrestling. It's all fake. All they do is get up there and talk shit and act like they're doing something, but they do nothing because it's all fake. It's all pretend. They're just playing pretend. They're doing that to appease their globalist masters who pull the strings. You have the Western elites controlling puppets, but you also have Eastern elites corrupting the Western puppets by lining their pockets and having the Western puppets do their bidding too. Because when China pays Chi-Com Biden to do something like to invoke woke policies or to do green energy stuff. Like the Chinese want us to do green energy stuff because they know it's going to kill our economy. Meanwhile, in China, it's smoggy 24/7 because their factories crank out products 24/7. They don't give a damn about no green energy or none of that Western garbage like the Great Reset garbage. China has their own ideas. They're building themselves up. They have their own plans for a reset. They're going to reset the world and make it a Chinese world. They are a Sino-Russian world because Russia's their best buddy. But yeah, you get the point. It's going to be a Chinese and Russian-dominated world after World War III. America and Western Europe and Australia and New Zealand and everyone else that's aligned with the West, they're all gone. They're all going to be gone. They're not militarily prepared. They're not logistically prepared for a world war. They're going to get smoked. They're going to get smoked so fast that they're not even going to see it coming. They won't even see it coming. Yeah, they do. They have troops in Canada. Absolutely, Daryl. That's part of my scenario. That's part of my documentaries I made. I made a documentary about the Pacific Northwest being invaded from Canada. It mentions that. See, the whole thing that I made, the stories that I wrote in Community tab, I have 4 stories. One's a very short one of like only 2 parts. It's called Late War Spec Ops Missions. It's about some Chinese Special Operations Forces of the People's Armed Police called the Snow Leopard Commando Unit. They go and do a raid on a partisan leader's base, and they capture the leadership. And then there's the other 3 stories are longer. My first one was my longest and really my most in depth. But then the second one was pretty damn good too. It was the one that took place in Phoenix. It was made to show what an urban situation would be like versus a rural, which the rural situation was the Broken Bow situation. Then I have my community tab reviews, which go over all of the stories. All of them are mentioned because I did different sections on that involved each story. So then you have my battle maps. My battle maps are my 96-hour invasion scenario, which is 36 videos. It's called word for word. It's called Documentary 96-Hour Invasion playlist. And then the other playlist is the Pacific Northwest playlist. And that's more battles, but that more focuses on terrain, whereas the 96-hour invasion focuses more on like cities and specific infrastructure and all that stuff. It takes place in different parts of the country. Now, as you go along in that video playlist, it gets better and better because I color-coded and made better maps as I went. Like halfway through, the maps get really more detailed, where I even break it down in some areas to like battalion level. Even companies in some aspects, like companies are smaller than a battalion. It's like companies, it goes like this. Squad is the smallest. Then you got a platoon. Then you got a company. Then you got a battalion. Then you got a regiment. Then a brigade. Then a division. Then a corps. Then a army or a group army or a combined arms army if you're Russia. Then you have like the whole military. Like that's from smallest to biggest in terms of like organization. But I broke it down into battalion sized and sometimes company sized in that as I went along. I got more detailed and more color coding. The maps were more colorful, like you could see things better. Then the Northwest map is kind of new. I even put in illustrations showing what some of the stuff on the ground would look like. You would probably really like that. I mean, it's more toward the end of that playlist. But yeah, I did a lot of stuff. I even broke it down to company level in the Washington D.C. battle, which was the final battle for the Capitol. Like in the last video of that, I broke it down to like company level, where they're storming the regime buildings and everything, and in their company-sized elements. Where I broke a battalion down into different companies. Yeah, it's in depth. It's very in depth. All of it is made to show what war is like. I wanted to show you what that type of war would be like. Total war of hybrid war, because I created it with real units, real equipment on both sides, and I created real places. They're doing real types of maneuvering. They're real units, real battle maneuvers, real everything, real logistical capabilities, real military capabilities. I even throw in the electronic warfare capabilities. I put it all in there. I put so much into those that, you know, it'll help you see really clearly how these things mechanically work. And I did it all to show what hybrid warfare doctrines look like, which is the Sino-Russian, the Chinese and Russian new war doctrines is called hybrid war, or fourth generation warfare, where you blend the concept of the Trojan horse with the blitzkrieg, with also ultra new technologies that are innovative on the battlefield. So, you know, yeah, Club Ks are a big part of it too. Club Ks, in all my scenarios, they're already inside the country in cargo yards and hidden in different locations. Can you imagine thousands of them just firing off at one time all over America? Can you imagine that? Like, you just have them firing out of random locations all over America, CCP properties, cargo yards, even behind Walmarts. Can you imagine that? They just all open up and fire and hit various targets everywhere. Yeah, they're more than just off the coast. They're inside the country. China and Russia got those in. Those are probably the easiest things they ever got in, because they're disguised as cargo containers. They're easy to get in. So, you know, China owns ports too. So, I mean, it's not like, you know, those ports become their logistic and naval bases. So China has owned our biggest port on the West Coast for over 20 years, the Long Beach port. So China has gotten a lot of their troops and materiel and vehicles and everything in through that port over the last 20 years. It's like they've done like the equivalent of what 20 desert shields were for the Desert Storm 4-day battle. Well, for my 4-day scenario, they did the equivalent of 20 desert shields for 20 years, which is enough for 5 million troops with their supplies, and they took over the nation. They took over the nation in 4 days, and most of the fighting was over by like day 3 or day 2 in some areas. But it was a 4-day war where the Chinese and Russians, in my scenario, used hybrid war doctrines to take over America lightning fast. A nation this vast, this big, they had enough troops, supplies, and everything to take it over that fast, because their hybrid warfare doctrines made it possible. And that's what my scenarios are showcasing. They're showing you how hybrid warfare works, how the units pop out of CCP properties, how they move around on the battlefield. It mentions what their equipment is and what it can do, their capabilities, everything. It's all real. It's all reality-based. Even though it's hypothetical, quote-unquote, it still is reality, because, you know, I have to call it hypothetical because it hasn't happened yet. But guess what? It will happen, because that is their actual war doctrines. That's what Chinese field manuals discuss. That's what their leaders discuss. That's what the book that written by 2 PLA colonels that were adjutants to generals, it's called Unrestricted Warfare. That talks about hybrid warfare too, in depth. In depth. This is real stuff, you guys. This is real shit. This is very real. It's not a joke. It's real. This is what they're going to do to take us over lightning fast. Yeah, I've been yapping on for a long time. Does anybody have questions for me before I go? Anybody? Where do you think they will strike? Will strike with what? It all depends. They're going to use a lot of conventional weapons. It's not going to be a lot of nuclear. It's going to be very limited nuclear weapons. Yes, they will nuke a few cities, but they're mostly going to nuke a few bases that are like in the way. Like in my stories, how I mentioned how the Fort Huachuca got nuked because it was in the path of the invasion forces, and they wanted to bypass it as fast as possible because they were on a time schedule. Well, they nuked Huachuca so that they could just bypass it and get to Phoenix and move on, because they were trying to go further north into Utah. Their objective was to get to the middle of the nation by day 2. So they were driving straight through, only stopping for fuel and to get water and MREs and to maybe do some quick maintenance or fluid checks on their vehicles. And they were making really good time because they were trying to race. It was a race. So yeah, they're going to hit anything that they deem is necessary, but they're also only going to nuke places if it doesn't interfere with their overall objectives. They don't want farmland that's contaminated with cesium, okay? With cesium, with radiation. They don't want farmland that's contaminated. So they're not going to go like super crazy on nukes. It's not going to be like, using up all the crazy glue to stick yourself to the ceiling or anything. I mean, no, they're gonna be very, very austere with their nukes. It's going to be largely conventional. China has such a humongous, gargantuan stockpile of munitions for all their ground attack planes, for their huge bomber fleet. Same with Russia. So when they come in, they have enough conventional munitions to blast every city to Kingdom Come with regular munitions, thermobarics especially. Chinese and Russian thermobarics are humongous. They can do with thermobarics what a low yield nuke would do. Like I'm talking like a 2 or 3 kiloton nuclear device. That what they can do with thermobarics is basically the same thing. It's just with no radioactive pollution. Hell, I mean, you drop like 4 thermobarics in one general area, you just wiped out like over a quarter of a city. You wiped out and I'm talking like a medium-sized city. You wiped out whole neighborhoods. That's a big deal. Thermobarics are huge. Russia has these thermobaric rocket launchers that are mounted on T-72 chassis. Now these thermobarics, they can saturate entire grid squares, meaning that a 1 by 1 kilometer area, a grid square on a military map is 1 by 1 kilometers. They can saturate a grid square with those thermobaric rockets. One launcher can saturate a whole grid square. And thermobarics are so nasty. If you're just outside the blast radius, it'll crush your organs and suck oxygen out of the air, and you'll die. That's if you're on the edge of the blast radius. If you're in the middle of it, you get burned up. It's a fuel air munition. It creates huge fiery explosions. Yeah, Daryl. It's Yeah, you want to be out in farmland, but yeah, those places, Daryl, they ain't gonna play nice with places like that. Let me show you something though. Like I'm gonna go back to my Texas map real quick. I'll show you all guys how this worked. Let me see here. Yeah, here we go. Y'all see my Texas map? Let me put it in the light. This is my Texas map that I used to show where Broken Bow was. See, in my scenario, Broken Bow was right here in Oklahoma. Wait, here we go. It's right here. And down here in Houston, you had the 83rd Group Army, which moved its AO north. See it, follow this. Moved it north to Texarkana, where they set up their headquarters. And part of their, and the element I wrote about in my story came from that unit, and they started fighting the partisans in that part of Oklahoma. So there's Texarkana, there's like the Red River Army Depot where they use the facilities there. They tried to take it intact. Then there's the Lone Star Ammunition Plant, the Army Ammunition Plant. That's here in Texas too. They produce like 5.56 and 7.62 NATO and things like that. Well, the Chinese wanted to take the city of Texarkana with all its infrastructure intact. So then they had their subunits going in different directions, to occupy the general area. Now, a group army is about 50,000 troops in size. It's like a whole army. A group army is what, like in America, we call ours an army. Well, in China, it's called a group army. And it's different units that comprise a group army. It's 50,000 troops. Then a division's like 15 or 16,000. This is 2 PLA Marine brigades. This is like the 1st and the 6th PLA Marine brigades. So I put a division sign, 2 X's. They land all up and down the coasts here around Houston, while the 83rd Group Army materialized on CCP regime properties all around Houston and inside of it. And then you had this PAP brigade, which is the 36th PAP. They materialized here too. Then here's the Russian 2nd Combined Arms Army, which was a Trojan unit that the guy that in my story, Alexandrovich, he was the guy in my 3rd story. Now remember, all my stories run concurrent. They're all happening at the same time. My 1st story took place in Oklahoma, but my 2nd story took place in Phoenix, which is further off the map, of course. But this 3rd story took place right here. We're at the Battle of Fort Hood against 3 Corps. You had the Chinese 68th Group Army. There's 50,000 troops. Then the Russian 2nd Combined Arms Army in central Texas. That's another 55,000 troops. So you had 105,000 troops going up against this American Corps, which was only like 32,000 men at best. Actually, it was a little more. It was like 40,000 troops at the time. But then you had the National Guard up here in Waco and Abilene. They're the 143rd Infantry Regiment, which is the Texas National Guard unit. Did you know that they're the National Guard's only airborne unit? I bet you didn't know that. Texas has an airborne unit in their National Guard. That's pretty cool. But it's the only National Guard airborne unit. The rest of the airborne units are active duty. But yeah, for a guard force, Texas is pretty big. It's the 2nd biggest guard force after California, only by 2,000. It's not much different in size. Then you had this group army. You had the 59th Group Army right here, starting in Dallas-Fort Worth. So they had to subdue. See, all these green dots are about 1,000 armed civilians. So all these green dots and the 36th Infantry Division of the Texas Guard, well, part of it, because remember, the Guard only mobilized to like 40% by the time the invasion began. So they crushed all these civilians, armed civilians. These red triangles are Chinese fighter squadrons or their tactical fighter bomber squadrons. These planes are strategic bomber squadrons, so it's 8 strategic bombers per. That's a lot of munitions per plane. Yeah, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm sorry y'all died again. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and end this. My phone battery's so low, I don't want it to keep dying, y'all. I wanted to thank you all for coming. I love you guys. This has been a really cool live. I mean, it's just a casual, just sort of BSing live. You know, I didn't really have anything in mind other than to, talk about my project and answer questions, and just wanted to make sure, everybody was doing all right and see how people were dealing with things. Just remember, there's a lot of hype going on because remember, America can be propagandized because Smith-Mundt is gone. So America's going to be hit with a lot of agitation propaganda. That's all it is. There's a lot of hype and a lot of propaganda in the news. So these stories that some of these people are reading are totally bunk. I mean, you really have to do a lot of referencing with actual solid facts and actual information. I'm not saying that everybody that reads stories is wrong. Some stories have truth in them, but I'm saying you really have to be careful what you listen to, and it's best to reference it with established facts and data. That's all I'm saying. Sometimes people lose their heads and they get into like a really crazy mentality and they start assuming the worst, but it's not that way. It's really not that way. I mean, people have to use good sense and good discernment. It's all about discernment, because a lot of people are going crazy right now because they think they assume the worst about everything. Like, oh my God, we're going to get nuked tomorrow. No, we're not. No, we're not. Like I said, the primary thing is they want to colonize us. Why would they nuke the whole place? They're not going to do a full-on nuclear war. If you don't live in any major cities, you don't live near any installations, then you know what? You're well off. You're pretty good. The main thing you have to worry about is conventional forces. So you have to stockpile logistics so that you can survive out in nature. You have to learn tactics. You have to understand how logistics work. You have to live off of logistics, so you need to stockpile them. So in my parting message to you all, I would simply say this. Do your own research. I'm glad to be a reference for people if you want to learn what I have to offer. I mean, I have a lot of good data and a lot of good research at your disposal, and for your use. And everything on my channel is free. It's all free. I don't care about no copyright garbage, none of it. All information should be free. You know, I agree with Monograph when he says that. You know, all information should be free. I don't do this for no money. I don't do this for nothing. I'm just doing this to help people. So if you see anything on this channel that you feel is helpful to you, please, by all means, use it. Rip it, copy it, save it, whatever, take it, I mean, print it. I don't care what you do. You can print and save all the stories, too, in the community tab if you have a way to do that. It's all for you guys. It's not, like, this is my knowledge and experience cobbled together that I'm sharing with you guys, combined with my research, combined with good discernment and good common sense. So, don't, when you watch these stories, use data and use discernment and research to see if they're true or to see if they're a bunch of hype and nonsense or propaganda to get people to be inflamed or riled up or whatever they're trying to do. And remember, they do want that because they want this place torn down so they can build back better, even though their build back better is going to fail because their Great Reset's going to fail, because it's designed to fail, because Satan eats his own, and the Eastern elites are going to destroy the Western elites, and they're going to colonize the West, and they're going to capture basically all the slaves they want, including the elites, who are going to learn the meaning of a hard day's work in communist China, in a slave labor camp there, or in a Russian supermax penitentiary like Black Dolphin. There's a doozy. All these mercenaries, yeah, they're going to go to Black Dolphin. I'm talking about the ones getting captured in Ukraine. They're going to serve double life sentences in Black Dolphin supermax penitentiary. People there can't even commit suicide because that's how many security checks they do. And it's like one of the worst prisons in all of Russia. It's so high security, it's like a hellhole. But, basically, yeah, the ghost cities, Daryl. I have videos about the ghost cities. Those are for the survivors of World War III in the beast system, and they're all over the world. They're in Angola, they're in China, they're in Turkey, they're in even one in Saudi Arabia, the one they call Nome. There's ghost cities in South America. They're all over the world. Those are not going to be hit during World War III because there's hardly anybody in them. Only the people that maintain them live there right now. But they're for the people that survive World War III that are going to go on to live in the beast system. But that, I have whole videos on that, and they're way back in my playlist. So if you're interested in that, Daryl, you can go back and watch those. They're pretty good. I even had a dream about the ghost cities. It was pretty creepy. But yeah, anyway, it was great talking to you all. It was cool to be casual tonight and not have to, read any talking points or any of that. It was nice to just sort of cut loose and talk to everybody and interact with everybody. So, I'm glad y'all came. I love you guys. Y'all be blessed. Thank you.